Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, but in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat and not a weary feet, come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading a path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of a bright star is cast.
All right, we are ready to begin. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our virtual luncheon. And I promise this should be a fun event this afternoon, and I'm just really glad that so many of you have stayed on the call. Hopefully everyone has had an opportunity to either grab a snack or a quick drink or something of their choosing. Today, we are going to do some storytelling because we know that telling stories are as old as time itself, and I don't think you can ever have more fun than having people tell stories about themselves. So today you're going to hear from several of our historically African-American churches. And I can't wait for you to hear from all of them. Before we get started, I do want to say thank you to my co-chair for this event, Claude Green, a member of St. Michael and All Angels Church. And also want to thank the Charlotte Angels chapter of the Union of Black Episcopalians, who this year have been co-sponsored this event. And we are so excited, and you're going to hear more about the UBE chapter in just a little while. I'm going to share my screen now so that you'll see the program, and it will follow as printed. So here we go. And, oh, I opened it, but I didn't share it. Oh. Shit. There we go. Shit. I don't know what's going on there.
We have it.
Ah, okay.
Kathy, we have it.
Very good. I can't see what we're doing. Sorry, I can't see you all. Here. All right. Can you see the screen?
You've got it there?
Yeah.
All right.
Are you doing the Zoom?
Yeah.
Yes, we have it.
Okay.
So at this time, I'd like to call Bishop Satan, who will do the opening prayer for us.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you all. Special appreciation to Kathy and Bishop Ann and the team for the service. Beautiful service, inspiring and full of the spirit of the day. Let us pray. O God, this day we give thanks for blessed Absalom Jones and for all of the leaders, clergy and lay of our historically Black congregations who are the embodiment of his legacy, his faithfulness, his perseverance, his determination to show the gospel of liberating love, not only with his lips, but in his life and in the life of the congregation he led and served. As we share stories this afternoon, and as we break bread together, let us remember the living legacy of blessed Absalom and the living promise of the beloved community. Help us to live more fully into this promise and to grow more and more into this expression of the body of Christ in our day and in our time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Again here.
I should unmute. Now we will begin with telling our stories, and we're going to start with St. Luke's Tarboro and Winfield Cruz.
Good afternoon. I was told that I would be sharing the story of St. Luke's. I didn't know how to address this. I said, I can sit here and talk from memory. I'll leave out something. And what I did was sit down and jot some notes together that I hope will provide the information you want. St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Tarboro has a very unique history. Prior to the Civil War and Reconstruction era, Blacks worshiped in Calvary Episcopal Church here in Tarboro. For some unknown reasons, the Blacks formed their own congregation and met in a small building on the grounds of Calvary Church. The building was called St. Luke's Chapel. Subsequently, the small group was able to purchase a plot of land on Panola and Pitt Streets in Tarboro, and it was admitted into the union with the Diocese of North Carolina in 1872 as a parish. They were served by a number of lay readers until the arrival of Reverend John William Perry in 1881. Reverend Perry was the first seminary-trained and properly ordained priest to lead St. Luke's. Under his leadership, a permanent building was completed in 1892, was consecrated by the late Bishop Joseph Blunt Cheshire in 1899, and is still in use today. Part of Reverend Perry's ministry was the establishment of St. Luke's Parochial School, which focused on reading, writing, and Bible study. Besides St. Luke's, Reverend Perry also served other small churches in the Tarboro area. Reverend Perry was followed by the Reverend Milton Moran Weston Sr., who was the second seminary-trained and properly ordained Episcopal priest to lead St. Luke. Both Reverend Perry and Reverend Weston were graduates of the Bishop Payne Divinity School, which was later replaced by Virginia Theological Seminary. Reverend Weston, along with his wife, the former Catherine C. Perry, who was the daughter of Reverend John Perry, expanded St. Luke's Parochial School into a recognized large parish school and renamed it Perry School in honor of the school's founder, John William Perry. At this school, the students received a broad cultural experience, including performing in plays, visiting the local nursing home for Blacks on holidays, and they even sang Christmas carols in the local radio station. I remember doing that. St. Luke's also had a Sunday afternoon Sunday school at 3 o'clock each Sunday. How well I remember. In addition to religious studies, students were taught extensive social values such as trust, self-confidence, etc., and respect. Mrs. Weston, the wife of the priest, also offered music at St. Luke's. Excuse me. Prior to his arrival in Tarboro, Reverend Weston had served a relatively large Black congregation in Savannah, Georgia, St. Augustine's Episcopal Church. And there he was not only the priest of the church, but the headmaster of the church school. St. Luke's is blessed to have Tiffany manufactured stained glass windows, which both Reverends Perry and Weston were able to obtain through contributions, donations, etc., from members of other parishes in the Eastern United States and from members of the St. Luke's congregation. Let me assure you, research has been done to validate the fact these windows of St. Luke's were made by Tiffany in New York. Excuse me. Like Reverend Perry, Reverend Weston also served other Episcopal churches around Edgecombe County. Reverend Weston's ministry lasted from 1917 till he retired in 1958. The Weston family line has included a son, Reverend Milton Moran Weston Jr., who served for many years as a priest of St. Philip's Episcopal Church in Harlem, New York, and a cousin, Reverend Quasi Thornell, who had served for years as a canon at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. 2014, St. Luke's was officially designated as a living historic church by the Diocese of North Carolina. The proclamation was delivered to St. Luke's by Reverend Ted Malone in 2015. Reverend Malone later wrote in a diocesan newsletter that St. Luke's was the first African-American church in our diocese to be approved for a living historic church designation. Thank you. And I think you will agree, I've talked long enough.
Thank you very much, Winfield. But it was a great story. So thank you so much. And now we will hear from Alice Freeman in St. Mark's in Wilson.
Thank you, Reverend Kathy. We are so grateful to have the resources of Lynn Hoke, Brooks Graebner, J. Robert Boykin III, and Patrick Valentine to help us as resources. In 1856, St. Timothy's Episcopal Church was established in Wilson. 30 years later, on April 18, 1886, Bishop Theodore Benedict Lyman held a service for local Blacks at St. Timothy's. Bishop Lyman wrote, quote, "I held a service in the church, St. Timothy's, for the colored people. A large congregation assembled. I confirmed 15 persons. There is much encouragement for the establishment of a colored church here," end quote. The bishop then admitted Freeman W. Dunn, a local school teacher and graduate of St. Augustine's School, to the diaconate, and he became the first clergyman to serve what was then called Grace Mission. In April of 1888, the minister at St. Luke's in Tarboro, John William Perry, also a graduate of St. Augustine's, took over Grace Mission as a part-time missionary. Bishop Lyman himself officiated 3 colored marriages at St. Timothy's during the same period. In the absence of a balcony in this church, one can only assume that Blacks and whites worship together at St. Timothy's, thus establishing a bond between the two communities that has lasted for more than 150 years. The readiness for confirmation perhaps was also due in part to John Clark, a Black mail carrier who built an altar in his house. On Sundays, he would gather people, especially children, feed them in his home, hold service, and feed them again. I guess nothing really changes, does it? You still have to feed Episcopalians to get them to come to a church event. So in 1887, Grace Mission was established, and within 2 years, a church was built. It was at that time the name was changed to St. Mark's. And in 1891, a parish parochial school was started in a rented hall. Within 1 year, Sunday school attendance was 35 and parish school scholars numbered 44. A school was actually built in 1895. The early 1900s saw attendance increase to 125 attending Sunday school and 159 children enrolled in the church parochial school. This significant increase was due in part to the white public school superintendent slapping a Black teacher. She walked out, as did the other teachers, and parents took their children out of the public school. St. Mark's has had a deep history, a deep passion and commitment for education, as evidenced by its summer enrichment program for students and after-school tutoring staffed by volunteers from both St. Mark's and St. Timothy's. In the 1950s and 60s, we were a feeder church for sending students to St. Augustine's College. In fact, all 8 daughters of James and Lily Ford attended and graduated from St. Augustine's. They in turn have established a scholarship endowment at the university in honor of their parents. In its history, St. Mark's has experienced 3 fires, and yet by the grace of God has survived. The big fire came in the middle of the night in 1897. Wilson's largest warehouse containing steam equipment and tons of tobacco went up in flames with a blaze seen for miles. When the mammoth stimmery collapsed, it engulfed St. Mark's, and like the phoenix, we did rise from the ashes. The church was rebuilt. However, in 1935, the trustees sold it and bought St. Sinai Baptist Church on South Reed Street in Wilson, which became the new and present home of St. Mark's. Finding and keeping Black priests has always been a challenge for African American churches. There aren't and have never been enough. The educational and financial challenges have made it difficult. Our heyday, perhaps, was in the 40s, 50s, and 60s when we had a full-time priest, the Reverend Robert Johnson, and nearly 100 communicants. But like everything else, church membership and attendance ebbs and flows. In the 70s and 80s, we mostly saw fill-ins and supply priests. In 1991, the Reverend Philip R. Byram was called to be the rector at St. Timothy's, and soon thereafter was asked by Bishop Estill to additionally serve as interim vicar at St. Mark's, which he did until his retirement last year. Shortly thereafter, seeing the need to provide church for the growing members and the growing numbers of Hispanics in the area, Father Phil established a Hispanic ministry and congregation named La Iglesia de la Guadalupana. This meant Father Phil was ministering to 3 separate congregations. In the year 2000, as he retired from St. Timothy's, St. Mark's welcomed the congregation of La Guadalupana. In a procession down the middle of Main Street, Pentecostal Holiness Mayor, Wilson Mayor, Bruce Rose, led that procession from St. Timothy's to St. Mark's. La Guadalupana and St. Mark's have been together for 21 years. Though we share a facility, we each are able to maintain our culture and traditions through individualized services. During the pandemic, that relationship continues to grow and develop stronger bonds. The monthly food distribution program conducted by St. Mark's for many years has become a joint venture, with Guadalupana taking the lead after a 10-month suspension due to COVID-19. With the resumption of food distribution just 2 weeks ago, over 330 people were served boxes full of food. St. Mark's, in the heart of Wilson's urban core, is known in the community as a place that cares about people. Its reputation is, if you need any help of any kind, just go there, or if you need someone to listen to, go and they will help you. That church on the corner. St. Mark's, with a dwindling congregation, continues to contribute and participate and remain involved in local, diocesan, and even programs and projects of the Episcopal Church. We consistently send a delegate to diocesan convention. We have representation at all levels of the church in an effort to be a voice of the people. Our members have participated in diocesan and Episcopal relief and development pilgrimages to learn and share while exploring God's mission for us, a small mission, yet part of the beloved community. Although small in number, we at St. Mark's are extremely hopeful and optimistic about the future, as we and Guadalupana jointly have begun the initial steps in securing a full-time priest to minister to the great needs in our community. And by the grace of God, we will once again rise like the phoenix. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Alice. Thank you. Beautiful story. And now we're going to keep coming. We're going to go to All Saints now. We're going to go to Warrenton and visit with people of All Saints.
Good morning and welcome to Warren County. All Saints Church began with Emmanuel Church, which was established in 1822. When the people of Warrenton began Emmanuel Church, colored and white people worshiped in the church. In 1893, there's no mention of colored members at Emmanuel, and it is believed that All Saints Church was then started. The church has had 2 locations. The first was in 1893 at the home of parishioners Annie and Albert Burgess, where the church and the school began. So like many of the churches, All Saints too had a parochial school. The second was at the present location on Front and Franklin Street. It was here in 1911 that the All Saints members built the Thomas Kane Memorial Chapel in memory of the Reverend Thomas Kane, at that time the only Black man at the time to have been a delegate to the General Convention. The chapel was consecrated by Bishop Cheshire in 1914 and admitted in 1922 into union with the Diocese of North Carolina. We know that All Saints existed in 1893 from Bishop Lyman's report of his activities to the Diocesan Convention and from Archdeacon William Walker's observation that the chapel was doing well. In the 1895 convention, Mr. Walker reported the success of All Saints in maintaining the school and requested aid from the diocese. It is noted that tuition at that time was 10 cents a week, and Miss Ada Harris from St. Augustine's was one of the teachers. The church has been served by some outstanding clergymen. Bishop H.B. Delaney served All Saints from 1892 until 1904 and was suffragan bishop of North Carolina. Bishop Bravid Harris served All Saints 1922 until 1924, and he was also Bishop of Liberia. He was the first Negro bishop of the Episcopal Church. The Reverend Odell Greenleaf Harris served from 1933 to 37. He was the valedictorian from Bishop Payne Divinity School, and returned to that school to teach. Bishop Harris, Bravid Harris, and Bishop Odell Greenleaf Harris all grew up in All Saints Church, being from Warren County, Warrenton. More recently, All Saints housed many community activities, agencies, etc. We had a child development center from 1976 to 89. We've had 2 different daycare centers. We've also had the domestic violence program and others. We were an active congregation in a physical location of the All Saints Church from up until 2015. At that time, the doors of the church were closed, and we transitioned from being a church structure to a body of church people, still carrying out the mission of our Lord and Savior. And so we are a church without walls, still viable and active in the community, still looking for the next project and opportunity to be of service. And so as we continue our wandering and our work, we are privileged to, on many occasions before COVID-19, to worship with the Chapel of the Good Shepherd, another one of our sister churches here in Warren County. And so we still continue to be active with them when we can. At this time, we are in a stage of transition, I would say, looking at how we can continue to serve God and serve our community. And so it is, we find ourselves having had a little more experience than some that are gathered today, having already known what it means to be a church without a building and to still be viable. So we had a little, I guess, prior experience. And so COVID-19 did not shake us at all. We were already doing what we had to do. And so church continued. And so the mission goes forward. And Sister will share a little bit more. You can talk to where we our services are.
Okay, so you will find that we are now in a planning process of trying to renovate and rejuvenate our facility. While our doors are closed, we are going forward to still do the work of the Lord by creating and being innovative, I would say, and trying to start a new venture. We have had the cornerstone service, and we reconfirmed the cornerstone, the Thomas Kane cornerstone. We had that service on September the 10th, 2020. And we are going forward now in a planning stage to revamp, renew, and rejuvenate. So we ask your prayers and ask you to ask that we be used of the Lord as he would have us to be.
Amen. Thank you so much. We know the Lord is not through with you all yet, and we have more things, and we can't wait to tell the diocese in someday in the future exactly what we will be doing in Warren County. So thank you very much. Next, we're going to Oxford and to Harry Mills. I understand they're having some power difficulties in Oxford today because of our charming weather, but I think Harry is still on with us. Harry Mills?
Thank you, Kathy. Greetings from St. Cyprian's. I am going to attempt to tell a story, not like Miss Freeman, she is awesome, but a story of St. Cyprian's. I think Kathy Comer in the Diocese of Texas, who's a great storyteller, would probably say stick to something else, Harry. But St. Cyprian's was formed in 1906 in rural Oxford, outskirts in a community that wanted to worship and serve God. And around 1959, they decided they want to move to the center on 408 Granville Street to be in the center of Oxford, the county seat, and to be here and worship. And they had a priest who was just amazing, who happened to be a carpenter. I think I've heard that story before. If you ever been to St. Cyprian's, you will see some of the things that he built, like the altar and the pews. That congregation was amazingly open to the community. They reared great parishioners, some who went on to become leaders in the civil rights movement of North Carolina, NAACP presidents, doctors who went to Germany to study and come back to Oxford to worship and serve St. Cyprian's, professors who went to St. Augustine University to teach and to come back and still serve, social workers and others who just served their community. The community also wanted to follow that old slogan, all are welcome. They opened their doors to people in the community, whether they were Episcopalians or not. They had dances, they had movie days, they had popcorn, they had food. Hospitality is always one thing that St. Cyprian does. Despite those individuals not joining the church, they have always been active. After Father Stanley left and being without a priest, a white priest who served a Caucasian community, Oxford has always had a history of some racial divide. This priest decided that St. Cyprian's would not be without a priest and decided that he would serve St. Cyprian's and St. Stephen's at the same time. And he did for numerous of years, despite some of the tensions in the community. An African-American church now have a few whites that began to serve in that community. And after that priest retired, and a few supply priests come back and forth for a few years, St. Cyprian's decided that community to reach out to a retired Lutheran pastor, different, message different, movement different. And after going through the community, inviting folks that we continue to have people that show up and visit, that pastor and the community decide to canvass. I remember myself going to Durham and canvassing with St. Titus. But we decided to reach out to a Hispanic community that none had done. And we canvassed in that community, we met an individual. And the next thing we know, there were 1 and 5 and 10 and 20 and 30. And St. Cyprian's decided to have one service. All are welcome. Spanish and English. All are welcome. We continued to grow. And when that Lutheran pastor retired and St. Cyprian's was still figuring out his community, it reached out to a young priest who was part of the LGBTQ community. All are welcome. St. Cyprian's, come. That priest guided us, and we began to see Black, white, Hispanic, gay, straight, and others join that church. Become active in the community, a Bible force. All are welcome. And as that priest got a call to go on to other duties within the diocese, the church reached out and decided to make that call to a retired bishop. All are welcome, come. In the midst of COVID and transformation, new priests, we had the best tithing year pledging than we've had in recent years. All are welcome. I gave you a story of St. Cyprian, not a historical one, for the names of Father Stanley, Father Simon, Ben Chavis, the Right Reverend Ben Chavis, and others that I left out, because I wanted to tell the story of what St. Cyprian is, and we as Episcopalians, all are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry. Please stay safe. And that is the message for all of us today, right? That all are welcome. All are welcome. We're moving to Greensboro now, and we're going to hear the wonderful story of the Church of the Redeemer.
Good morning. So the history of the Redeemer begins in 1906. The Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina decided that a mission was needed for the colored Episcopalians living in Greensboro. The organizer of the mission was Mr. William Thomas Wallace, Sr., who was educated at St. Augustine College in Raleigh, North Carolina. While at St. Augustine, he met Archdeacon Clarence Delaney, who would become his lifelong friend. Mr. Wallace assembled approximately 12 communicants in his home who shared with him a vision to have a mission that would grow broader through ministry, deeper through discipleship, warmer through fellowship, and larger through evangelism. In 1909, Archdeacon Delaney sent a letter of authorization to Mr. Wallace to begin a mission in Greensboro. The letter detailed how to establish a mission and from whom to seek help. S.B. Sebastian and Frank Debrum were named to assist him. Joseph McDonald, a lay reader from St. Augustine College, delivered the Archdeacon's letter and was sent to conduct worship. The first step was to secure a place of worship. President James B. Dudley of the Agricultural and Technical College for the Colored Race, later named North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, permitted Sunday services to take place in the campus chapel. 9 congregants attended the first worship in June 1909. In the fall of 1909, the services were moved from the college to the Masonite Lodge on South Davie Street. Attendance continued to increase to such an extent that to accommodate future growth, additional space was needed. Parishioners formed the committee to explore available and affordable lots for sale. Lands in the northeast district of the city, located on the east corner of Market and North Dudley Streets, was purchased from a Greensboro businessman. An existing one-room structure suitable for conversion into a chapel was on the lot. The congregation heartily engaged in remodeling the building. The Reverend James Satterwhite became the first vicar to serve the new mission. Mr. Edwin Fisher was the first superintendent of the Sunday school. Mrs. Marie Byers was the first organist. Mr. S.A. Sebastian was the chorister. Miss Margaret Wallace, sister of William Thomas Wallace, was the first Episcopal parochial school teacher. Through evangelism, the church flourished so much that it had to be dismantled and rebuilt in 1927 to accommodate a larger congregation. The Right Reverend Bishop Cheshire conducted the first confirmation service for the new mission. Mrs. Emma Friday Wallace, wife of William Thomas Wallace Sr., was among the first to be confirmed at the mission. Olive Lucille Wallace, daughter of William Thomas and Emma Friday Wallace, was the first baby baptized there. Mr. Sebastian donated a one-room house located on Beach Street to the mission. This became the first rectory. In 1948, it was remodeled, and Sampson and Lenny Bernice Foster were married there on December 27, 1948. From 1928 to 1952, Deacon Jordan J. Green, a dynamic and charismatic leader, led the mission. All the parishioners loved him, and the mission grew by leaps and bounds. Additional renovations were done for the third time. In 1930, Father Green was ordained to the priesthood. He organized a building campaign, which was given to the next administration. Father J. Howard Thompson succeeded Reverend Green as vicar. In 1954, the old white church building was condemned, and Father Thompson requested and received a grant of $12,500 from the National Church. On November 4th, 1956, the first unit of a new building complex was opened for worship. The building was designed by Mr. William Street, a parishioner, and was built by Latham Construction Company. During the 1960s and the 1970s, under the leadership of Father Hicks and Father Wickens, respectively, the Redeemer was engaged in many activities and saw many changes. It often served as the meeting place for the civil rights organizers during the days of desegregation. The Redeemer boasts of hosting the citywide Ash Wednesday services of the Episcopal Greensboro Convocation for 30 years in celebration of its active participation in the civil rights movement. In 1966, the Reverend Carlton Owen Morales from the Diocese of Panama became the vicar of the Redeemer Mission. In 1969, after the completion of the sanctuary, the new church was consecrated along with the blessing of the parish rectory. In 1970, the Leary Room was dedicated. In 1976, Mrs. Fannie Leary, Senior Warden, made application to the diocese for parish status for the Redeemer. In 1979, at the 163rd Diocesan Convention under the leadership of Bishop Thomas A. Frazier, the Church of the Redeemer received full parish status. The years 1980 to 1999 saw the remodeling of the kitchen, the organization of the Servant Center, the installation of new pews and storm doors in the sanctuary, and the church became debt-free. After 30 years of faithful and dedicated service to the Redeemer in the city of Greensboro, Father Carlton Owen Morales retired in 1999. In March 2000, Father Clifford Cole served as interim rector. In May 2003, Father Wager J. Bright was called to serve as the second rector of the Episcopal Church of the Redeemer. During his tenure, the Redeemer celebrated its centennial with an activity of celebration each month during the year of 2006. Prior to the end of his tenure in July 2007, Father Bright oversaw the process to obtain the charter of the Piedmont Triad chapter of the Union of Black Episcopalians. From July 2007 to November 2008, the Reverend Francis Cox served Redeemer as the supply priest. Reverend Dr. Alicia Alexis was our rector from 2008 up until 2019. We're currently undergoing our search process for a new reverend. Thank you.
And thank you very much. Thank you very much. We're headed to Charlotte. And so with that, we will go to Chapel of Christ the King and Father Reggie Payne Wayne.
Good afternoon. So when I looked at the history, I've told this history a couple times and I've heard it a couple times, and every time I hear it or tell it, I learn something new. And so I kind of wanted to share with you a little story about the beginning, and then kind of go through and talk to you a little bit about the trends and things that I saw this particular time as I went through the history. The chapel of Christ the King started as Chapel of Hope, and was founded or started by the Brotherhood of St. Andrews out of St. Peter's, actually in 1891. I had, the last time I talked about this said 1921, but it actually started in 1891, and it started on Brevard Street, just north of the railway, which was at that time listed as outside the city limits. If you know anything about Charlotte, you know that is the center of town practically. Nowadays. So it was started there in Highland Park Mill number 1. And it was part of it was a mill church that was built. And it was, for a while, they met in a Miss Julia Harris house. Actually, for 18 years, they met in her house. And then in 1921, they built a church, and Bishop Cheshire consecrated that church in 1922. And that's the building in which we currently worship. And so from the 1920s through the 1950s, that was a pretty good time at the church. Things were growing, the neighborhood was doing well, and things were just hopping along. And then, you know, and they said there was a rededication, a reorganization into a self-supporting mission that happened in the 1950s. And when that happened, they built a building. They added a building to the church in 1950, and then another one in 1957. And then along came a really young priest named Hugh Craig. And the only reason I know he was young in 1962 was because in 2009 to 2013, he was my assisting priest in Austin, Texas. He did our Rite One service. And I didn't know this until the last time I went through the history. I found his name because nobody there who's there now talked about him. Hugh Craig was a wonderful guy, but he was there from 1962 to 1966. And when he left in 1966 was when the neighborhood changed. And he left and resigned and left and took 40 parishioners with him and went, and they were the people who founded All Saints in Concord, which is where Hugh Craig's aunt is buried, which he told me in Texas, but I never made the connection that he was talking about All Saints Concord. So that's just a little part of the history that tells you how 1 degree of separation happens in the Episcopal Church. So continuing the story, at that point, around 68, 69 was when St. Michael's and All Angels had left their building. Their building had been condemned. They came over and was worshiping in the structure over at the chapel. And that lasted for many years. It lasted until from the 1960s through the 1980s. So while the other stuff was going on at the chapel, St. Michael's and All Angels was worshiping in that space during that time. The other thing that happened in 1968, the Christ the King Center, which I didn't realize it was that old. In 1968, the Christ the King Center was founded, and that was the city's and the diocese dedication to inner city ministry, and that was their response, was creating Christ the King Center, which had its heyday later. It had its heyday later in our history when Bishop Gloucester was there and a couple others. Bishop Gloucester was there for almost 10 years. And during his time, he redeveloped the Christ the King Center into a place that had more than, they say, 18,000 people who came through it during his tenure who were touched by the ministry of that center. They had family fun nights for the neighborhood where they had concessions, and they had movies, and they played games, and it was for everybody in the neighborhood, and they would sell popcorn and drinks and all that kind of stuff. They had an after school program that had state-of-the-art or top-notch dancers and artists and photographers and everything that came in. And there were churches, St. Martin's, St. John's, Holy Comforter, Christ Church, all sponsored kids in that program and sponsored that. And they had funding from DuPont and from Foundation of the Carolinas and from the state that funded all of that work that they were doing. And that's what was going on. And the other thing about about Chapel of Christ the King is throughout their history, they went through 2, 3, 6-year periods where they were lay-led, where there was no clergy, not even part-time clergy. They had supply who came in on Sunday, and during the rest of the time, they were lay-led. And they had some really key priests who were part of that, not only that supply time, but who came in as part-time vicars and priests in charge who really inspired them and held the line for what was pretty much established from their beginning, which was a love for the community, a thirst to do outreach ministry. And if you look at their history, throughout their history, they did that. They were always involved in the community, always, even when they didn't have a priest and they barely had any money. What little money they had went towards whatever ministry they could come up with for the community. I arrived there in 2016 as a supply priest. And at that point, they had been without a priest since 2014. And which Mother Angela was there during that time. She was there from 2010 to 2014. And she had established a few ministry that they kept running after she left. They had a coffee ministry every Sunday after church. They would make coffee and take it to the homeless guys who lived on the street a couple blocks from the church. And they were doing that on their own. And they also had a community lunch once a week where they served anywhere from 40 to 60 people who came in and picked up a lunch. And so it's been a remarkable run for them. One of the other things that I always like to point out to people and remind people is Chapel of Christ the King did not start out as a historically Black church. It started out as a mill church, of predominantly white people. It wasn't until the 1960s, almost 70s, when the neighborhood changed, was when the church changed. When folks left and went up to All Saints, was when the Black folks came in and have been there ever since. And it's had a fairly long history, almost 60 years of being a Black church. And that's how it identifies itself, a Black church that's open to all people. We have Latino and white and Black folks who all worship there together. Straight, lesbian, LGBTQ community is also a part of our church. And since I've been there as the part-time vicar since 2018, we've continued to listen for God's call to us into the community. And we have established a few things. And if you've seen some of the other stuff that we put out, we are currently working on our edible garden space, as well as renovating. We have a set of drawings that we have put together, an architect has put together for us to redevelop a piece of property that we own, to put some affordable housing on that property, which will generate some income for us and help us to become more self-efficient. One of the things I've heard several of the other churches say, which is also true for us, is that we have no debt, which we're very proud of. And in this 2020 year, where everybody lost some income, we lost very little. We lost less than 1%. So we're very proud of that. And we hope that 2021 will be a year that further reflects the rich history of the chapel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One of the things I liked hearing you say is, retelling the stories over and over. Every time you learn something new, and it's those new nuggets too that can inspire others and keep us all going and keep us all marching, right? So thank you for continuing to research and find out more. At this time, we're going to hear from Pam Hunter, who is going to tell us about St. Michael and All Angels in Charlotte. You're muted, Pam.
Thank you for this beautiful opportunity for this program here today. It has been most inspirational. And I would tell you, my heart is thumping pretty hard because it's very difficult to come behind all of these wonderful storytellers. It has been a fantastic afternoon, and I have really learned so much about the African-American history of the Episcopal Church in the diocese. I guess to sum up the story of St. Michael's, there are two phrases that would come to our mind, and that would be God of our silent tears, and great is thou faithfulness. St. Michael's was born out of St. Peter's, as most of the Episcopal churches were here in Charlotte. If you know anything about Charlotte, you will know that there's the center of town where Trade Street and Tryon Street intersect, and that is called the Square. That's the square of town. That's where the first business started when Charlotte was formed. 2 to 3 blocks down the street from the square is St. Peter's Episcopal Church. And in 1882, a very, very kind lady who actually was an angel to St. Michael and all angels helped raise the money for the beginning of St. Michael and all angels. Her name was Jane Renwick Wilkes. Her husband owned the largest flour company in the southeastern part of the country. And with her philanthropy, she was instrumental in obtaining the money to start St. Michael's, which was located off of Hill Street. Church stayed at Hill Street from 1882 until the mid-60s, which connects us to what Father Reggie just said when he indicated that the congregation of St. Michael's came over to Christ the King Chapel to worship in the 60s. Now, not only did St. Peter's, through the leadership of Jane Renwick Wilkes, formulate St. Michael's, but 5 years later, the history tells us that the congregation of St. Michael's, along with the dignitaries of that day, marched from St. Michael's about a block down the street to lay the cornerstone of the first African-American hospital in the Southeast United States, Good Samaritan Hospital. So St. Michael's and Good Samaritan Hospital were born within 5 years ago, and they were instrumental in serving the same community. The former location of St. Michael and All Angels, as the story goes, and some of you have heard me say this before, is that it was located right where the Carolina Panther Stadium is today. Some folk have gone so far as to say that the church literally sat on the 50-yard line. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it was somewhere located in the stadium. Now, to put things in perspective as with what was taking place in history during that time, we know today that the issue of healthcare for folk is a hot political issue. And it is very telling that in 1887, we had the leadership from St. Peter's and the Association of St. Michael's with the Good Samaritan Hospital, because that literally provided health care for a society of persons who had never had the opportunity to ever be treated in a hospital before. We're going to move forward until we get until the 1960s, about the mid-60s. And what was occurring then in the history of of the South was the concept of what was called urban renewal. The way urban renewal worked was cities decided that they were going to advance the communities in certain ways by expanding the streets and that kind of thing. And it just so happened that the urban renewal for Charlotte came right through the area where St. Michael's was located and literally where the Good Sam Hospital was located. So in the 60s, St. Michael was closed, and St. Michael's was did worship at Christ the King Center and did not literally have its own physical building place again until the mid 1980s. And that is when the church moved over to its former location on Hovis Road. So we have a history here where we see that from 1882 until the mid 60s, about 80 years, St. Michael was in place over near the Panther Stadium. And then from the mid 60s until the 80s, mid 80s, St. Michael was temporarily housed at Christ the King Center, still looking for permanent location, and was able to obtain it in the mid 80s. While there at Hovis Road in the late 2000s, we had a priest by the name of Father Wendell Phillips. And Father Wendell was very concerned about the structure of the church. And he felt as if the facilities were just not up to par. That created members of the church to come together and formulate a committee to conduct a needs assessment to determine what could be done to remodel the church. When that took place, it was determined that it would be most expedient to actually tear the church down than to try to remodel it because of the dilapidated condition that it was in. In addition to that, during the same period of time, St. Michael's was conducting a totally free after-school program for the neighborhood children within that area. And fortunately, we had computers donated to us to be used for that program. To add to the fact that we had already been told that we couldn't remodel the building, when the technology people came in an effort to do the wiring for the computers, they found out that because of the way the building was structured, that it could not be wired for Wi-Fi. So that really was the icing on the cake in terms of having to do something about that building. And the fact that the building sat on less than an acre of land did not make it feasible to try to tear it down at that location and rebuild. So during this entire period of time, we were blessed with different clergy leadership. And more specifically, we were under the guidance of Canon Beth Ely. And Canon Ely looked at where we were and what we needed to do to go forward. And she decided that we needed to do a Bible study called The Wilderness Journey. And that wilderness journey study took place for about 6 to 8 weeks. And we had no clue what the wilderness journey would have entailed and how appropriate and how necessary it was for us to have gone through that in terms of the journey that we were about to embark upon, because there is no way you can see what the future will be. We ended up purchasing one piece of land off of Mallet Creek Road in Charlotte, out in the University City area. And the Department of Transportation, shortly after we purchased it, decided that they wanted to exercise Their power was under eminent domain, and we had to adhere to the demands of the state of North Carolina. And then we had, as a result of that, we had to find another location to build our church. We were fortunate enough to find property located off of David Cox Road and Sugar Creek Road here in Charlotte. And in the area that we have found our land in University City, standing alone, University City would be the 10th largest city in the state of North Carolina. We are very proud of where we have come from, because when you look at the history of St. Michael's, you will see that for the last 55 to 60 years of our existence, we have been literally homeless in terms of not having a permanent physical place to worship at least 50% of the time. We have been homeless. Currently, we are in the process of completing negotiations and memorializing and a written agreement with the diocese that would enable St. Michael's to commence building its new church home. It has been a long journey. It has been an arduous journey, but we give all the praise and glory to the perseverance and the steadfastness, the dedication, and the determination of the congregation of St. Michael and All Angels. Because when you look at being homeless about 50% of the time over 60 years, it takes a lot of faith to persevere through that. But we remain faithful. We are very optimistic about our future. We look forward to having a church home where we can implement the programs that we are very, very eager to do, and of having permanent clergy leadership. So as the old saying goes in our hymn, we will march forward until victory is won. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. What a great story. And a story of great resilience. And we've heard so many of those today across the diocese. And I want to thank each and every one of our storytellers, and tell Harry Mills, Kathy Comer would be very proud. I know her. I'll give her a good report, and a good report for all of you. I am going to share my screen now because we have a special message from the Reverend Jamon Taylor of St. Ambrose, who could not be with us today because of a death in his congregation, but he wanted to do sort of a roll call that will sort of bring this all full circle. So hold on for me just 1 second.
Greetings. My name is Jamon Taylor, rector of St. Ambrose Church in Southeast Raleigh. Black Episcopalians in this diocese have made tremendous contributions, not only here, but in the state, the nation, and the world. I'm going to do a roll call, just lifting up a few of the individuals who have made extraordinary contributions who are from this diocese, Black Episcopalians. This list is not exhaustive, but here is the roll call. Father Perry from Lewisburg, the second Black person ordained in this diocese, and a slave person who made his way to St. Augustine's University. He then went to Tarboro, where he served there at St. Luke's, and then helped found St. Mark's in Wilson. And his descendant, Moran Weston, the Reverend Moran Weston, was rector of St. Philip's Harlem, the second oldest Black Episcopal church in the United States, a church at that time of more than 3,000 members, the Church of Thurgood Marshall, where he was senior warden. We have the Reverend George Freeman Bragg, historian of historic St. James, Baltimore, the church that gave us formerly Bishop Curry and now presiding Bishop Curry, the oldest Black Episcopal church in the South. He has connections and was born in Warrington. We have Blessed Henry Beard Delaney, the first Black bishop in the diocese, consecrated 1918. We have Blessed Pauli Murray, the first Black woman ordained and Episcopal priest. We have Blessed Anna Julia Cooper, born, baptized, married in Raleigh, education reformer, the only woman and the only Black person who is in the U.S. passport. We have Bishop Bravitt Harris. We have All Saints Church Warrington, the only church as a national monument to Sunday schools around the U.S., where Sunday schools sent money to purchase stones, to purchase bricks that went to the construction of that beautiful edifice. We have St. Cyprian's in Oxford, the home of Ben Chavis, of course, of national and international renown. We have Romare Bearden, the artist, the Cubanist, the modern artist, baptized at St. Michael and All Angels Church in Charlotte. We have Bill Campbell, former mayor of Atlanta, and Ralph Campbell, North Carolina State auditors, descendant of Willie ODK in Raleigh. St. Augustine's University itself, at one time, 1 in 3 Black Episcopal priests came from that institution until the late 1970s and 1980s. And to end the roll call where I started at St. Matthias, Lewisburg, we have Kelly London, the first Black woman county commissioner for Franklin County. Roll call of Black ministry in this diocese, work we've done in the past, work that is happening now, and we have a bright future ahead.
Indeed. Indeed, the future is bright here. One of the things you may notice today is that education has been a major theme running throughout all of these churches. So many of them had schools in some form or fashion throughout their history. And of course, that gives us a very strong connection to St. Augustine's College. At this moment, I'm going to change this around, and we're going to have the Reverend Hershey Millette Stevens come on and do a brief introduction about the chapel and tell us about St. Augustine's.
I'm coming on. I'm trying to share my screen. I'm like the worst millennial ever. So I'm not. I'm learning all this technology right along with you all. So one, I want to just say it is amazing and refreshing and exciting to hear about how all of our communities and churches are connected, and St. Augustine's seems to be kind of a red thread through our history. I'm just going to do a quick introduction of myself and the ministry at St. Augustine's University as it is now. I am now serving as the Dean of the Chapel and Spiritual Life. I'm supported and assisted by the incomparable Reverend Sally Simpson, who is our university deacon. A lot of the students at St. Augustine's University come from different faith traditions, different Christian communities, and some of them have not ever heard of St. Augustine. So I always talk about St. Augustine's of Hippo when I speak with the students, and talk about his influence as a Northern African bishop who influenced all of Western Christianity. And so one of the things that we do is highlight St. Augustine's quotes and readings at the university. So I want to tell you a little bit about our students. We have 47 students on scholarships, on Episcopal scholarships, and active in the chapel program. Those students who are on the Absalom Jones institutional grant, which is given for any student who comes from an Episcopal church, they get half off tuition. It's about $8,000 tuition grant. We have students on the colleges and universities of Anglican Communion Kellogg grant, which is a grant that was, scholarship, which is a scholarship from an endowed fund to assist students who attend St. Augustine's University or Voorhees University, or Voorhees College. And we have the Episcopal Church Office of Black Ministry scholarships that come from some of the trust fund scholarships of the Episcopal Church. And so of those 3 scholarships, we have 47 students who participate. If they receive one of these scholarships, I mandate that they participate in 85% of chapel activities, and the students have responded well to this requirement. So that means that they, read scripture in chapel, they create spiritual programs for their other student, for the other university students to attend, like retreats and scavenger hunts. And, you know, our students, they are wonderful people, and they have been leaders, especially in this difficult time of COVID. You know, I encourage them, though we're a small percentage of the student body, to, you know, to be a witness for their classmates. So, you know, we have mandatory testing, and so they participate in mandatory COVID testing. You know, we talked about leading by example, and, you know, so our students wear their mask and wait 6 feet apart and wash their hands. And we talk about that as a part of doing ministry on campus. Just a little bit more about our students. They are from all over the United States, Bahamas, Jamaica, Honduras, and Kenya. And they participate on campus. Some are on the track team, the volleyball team, the softball team. We also have 12 students who are on the Dean's List. All of our students have over a 3.0 GPA, and they are represented as senior class president, Miss St. Augustine's University, and Mr. SAU, who are kind of the face of the student body at St. Augustine's. So though we are a small percentage of the student body, we are well represented in the achievers and student leaders on campus. And so if you want to get in touch with us, of course, you know, you can send me an email. Because of COVID, the campus is closed right now, and we are holding virtual services, and you can find us on Facebook at St. Augustine's Chapel /CFO every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Right now, we are broadcasting live from the chapel, thanks in part to a grant from the United Thank Offering that helped us get cameras and different computers and equipment to bring the services to you all, or to our broader community using using the live stream technology. I also, before I finish, want to thank especially the Episcopal Church women who have been so supportive of our ministry here. They donated $1,000 for the memorial garden that we're planning for our late president, Dr. Irving McPhail. And also the Episcopal Church women have been supportive of the international students in helping them pay their insurance and meeting needs for books. And so I just want to, you know, publicly thank you all who are members of ECW for your commitment, for your prayers, and the things that you've done to help our students. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank Bishop Ann and Bishop Sam, who have been supportive of this ministry, especially in this very difficult year. So I thank you for your time and attention. And please, if you have any questions or would like to get in touch, please email me at st-aug.edu. And you can get in touch with our deacon, Sally Simpson, at earthlink.net. Thank you all.
Thank you so very much, Reverend Stevens. And so now you see why we asked you to give and give generously today to St. Augustine's Chapel to help support and undergird the work that they are continuing to do in this community, as they have for so many years at this time, so many years here in the diocese and around the world. One of the co-sponsors, as I mentioned to you earlier, today is the Charlotte Angels chapter of the Union of Black Episcopalians. And we have none other than Mr. Claude Green with us today, who is going to tell you a little bit about UBE and the particular chapter down in Charlotte and how others may get involved.
Good afternoon. I was asked to talk about the UBE, and I thought I would give you a short timeline history of how the Union of Black Episcopalians got started. excuse me, the earliest known national organization for Black Episcopalians is the Protestant Episcopalian Society for Promoting the Extension of the Church among Colored People. It was founded in 1856 by James Theodore Holly of St. Luke's, New Haven. Then there were 4 Black clergy and 7 congregations with their female auxiliaries, and they were called the Good Angels. They fought the exclusion of Blacks from the Episcopal seminaries and conventions, as well as the refusal of the Episcopal Church to take a stand against slavery. After the Civil War, General Convention, Protestant Episcopal Freedoms Commission established schools and churches in the South. Southern white resistance, Northern white apathy, and dwindling revenues led to the disbanding of the commission in 1867. That same year, a group of Blacks in Baltimore founded the Society for the Promotion of Church Work Among the Colored People. It pressed for the reestablishment of a national program for Black evangelism and education. In a few years, it ceased to exist. In 1882, a Mississippi priest launched a powerful attack on Blacks, arguing that sparse Black Episcopal growth was due to their intelligence, moral, lack of leadership skills. The Southern bishops then proposed the Sewanee Plan to segregate Blacks into a racial diocese. John Peterson, an aged teacher and a deacon at St. Philip's Church in New York, called the Black clergy together, who organized the convocation of colored clergy, The convocation met annually every 3rd year. It met at the site of the General Convention and appointed lobbyists to press for Black goals. Conferences were highly organized with great festive services, lectures, reports, and stirring debates. Annual proceedings were published. It sponsored a monthly newspaper called the Afro-American Churchman, and later became the Church Advocate. It was edited by George Freeman Bragg Jr. of St. James, Baltimore. The interaction on a national basis fostered a common distinctive churchmanship among Black Episcopalians. The convention of the Colored Clergy Conference continued until the mid-1960s. Although it was gradually gave way to the Episcopal Society for Culture and Racial Unity, which was founded in 1957. Although the Episcopal Society for Cultural and Racial Unity seemed more in tune with the political thrust of the Civil Rights Movement, it was unable to adapt to Black power and ceased to function. On February 8th, 1968, 17 priests met at St. Philip's Church in New York and founded the Union of Black Clergy and Laity. Their mission was to remove racism from the church and society and to stimulate the growth of Black membership. In 1971, the name was changed to the Union of Black Episcopalians. The Union of Black Episcopalians is comprised of more than 55 chapters and interest groups throughout the continental United States and the Caribbean. The Union also has members in Canada, Africa, and Latin America. The Union of Black Episcopalians holds true to its time-honored mission to fight racism by encouraging the involvement of Black clergy and laity in the total life of the church, which includes mission, stewardship, evangelism, education, governance, and politics. There are 2 UBE chapters in North Carolina, one being the Triad Piedmont chapter in Greensboro, and of course, our chapter, the Charlotte Angels, which is located in Charlotte. We have just completed a membership drive, and we are welcoming to anyone who's wishing to become part of the Union of Black Episcopalians. I will put the Union of Black Episcopalians, web address and the Charlotte Angels contact information in the chat. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you for that great information and that historical retrospective. I really appreciate that. Excuse me. UBE is something that is near and dear to my heart. When I was in Tallahassee for just under 2 years, we got a new chapter established there. And I received a phone call recently from someone in Durham asking if we would consider an interest group in this area of the diocese. So who knows, we may have another chapter come online in just a little while, and that would be wonderful too. But ladies and gentlemen, this really concludes the formal part of our service. We are so grateful to all of you who stayed with us through lunch and listened to all of these fabulous stories. I have just a couple of announcements before we go away. Someone sent me a note in the chat box and asked if they could get a copy of the roll call that was done by Jamon. And I am going to, I reached out to him and he is happy to share that. So I'm going to share that with you, and you can download, you have a link now to that in the chat box, and you are welcome to do with that what you like. Father Jamond also would love to hear more of your stories. So if there are stories that we heard today that were not included in the roll call, please direct that information to Father Jamond Taylor at St. Ambrose. And he would love to hear that because he would like to make sure that we keep that roll call as up to date and accurate as possible. And finally, since I see Bishop Sam is still on with us today, because I know he's got a very busy schedule. He's got Bishop's Ball this afternoon. And so we're grateful for you hanging out with us this day, Bishop Sam. But if you have any closing thoughts, I will let you take the floor, and then I will do a closing prayer.
Kathy, wonderful program, and thanks to each of the storytellers for lifting up their witness, their history, and the ways that they're still actively involved in seeking God's mission and serving God's people. Couldn't be more inspired by the day. There's a lot of work ahead of us, but there's a lot of work that's been done, and I'm inspired by the faithfulness, the perseverance, and the leadership that has come from this diocese and continues to grow and deepen. And I'm grateful, especially Kathy, for your role in convening folks from all of these different congregations and bringing them together to share the stories as part of our celebration of Absalom Jones. And what an appropriate way to lift up and celebrate his legacy among us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bishop. And now we will have a closing prayer. Thank you all again for your participation today. And I look forward to being with all of you again very, very soon. And now let us pray. Oh God, give us courage to stand up and be counted, to stand up for those who cannot do it for themselves, and to stand up for ourselves when it is necessary for us to do so. Let us fear nothing more than we love you, and let us love nothing more than we love you. Let us have no other God before you, whether nation or party or state or church. Let us seek no other peace but your peace, and make us its instruments, opening our eyes and ears, our hearts and minds, so that we may always know what work of peace we may do for you. Amen.
Amen.
Have a great afternoon.